I wanted to watch this. It is a debate that Destiny had. Peter Boghossian, I believe it is. Peter Boghossian? Boghossian? One of those two. Peter has these street interviews and street debates where he has people talk to each other, disagree, talk the issues out after they rate themselves in the scale he's laid out on the little floor. And so he's decided to have Destiny debate the topic of support for Ukraine in this series of street debates. And I wanted to check it out because Destiny has had a string of quick, snappy Ukraine debates with mixed results, whether it was the debate with the Hodge twins or the debate with Sebastian Gorka. Let's check out this one.
Ukrainians want to fight. If they want to fight, it's their country, it's being invaded. If China or Mexico or Canada invaded U.S. territory and some protracted war happened and there were Americans that really wanted to fight in that war, I don't know if it would be enough to say, well, you know, Mexico might want to invade, but do we really want to lose American lives? Do we really care that much about...
So being on the street is the gimmick here? Yes.
South Texas, like, I mean, we can just give them that and it's okay. I think if the people have a desire to fight and they really want to, I think they should be empowered to do so, especially if they're fighting what's largely an ideological enemy of the United States, and I would say an enemy that's clearly morally in the wrong in this case, in terms of invading a sovereign state for no good reason and trying to take territory from them.
I agree with you that if it was a voluntary action by the people that are fighting on both sides, I would wholeheartedly agree with you. And I agree with the morality of it completely. My problem is that that's not what we have here. What we have here is both sides shanghaiing people, arresting them at airports, arresting them at checkpoints, border checkpoints, and dragging them back and throwing them into the meat grinder.
Oh, so we're going to get a debate about conscription and whether conscription is a moral policy under any circumstance.
On both sides.
Okay, sir. Some people call you Destiny, other people call you...
Stephen.
Stephen, and where are we today, sir?
In beautiful, sunny Miami.
And we've never met, right?
No.
And you've never met him?
No.
Okay, so nobody knows anybody. Perfect. All right. The claim, the United States should support Ukraine for as long as Ukraine wants to fight. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move.
I mean, I would be in agree or strongly agree. Obviously, I don't think that's a big surprise.
Okay. Tell him why you disagree. Tell Stephen.
I disagree because we should support them.
By the way, can I just throw out there, this is like some guy on the street that they found, okay? This isn't some like big conservative like talking head or like some big political actor. This is some guy they found on the street. So I'm gonna try not to be like too mean, because like if you work your 9 to 5 every day and you have your limited amount of time with your kids, I can understand that they don't spend, not everybody would spend so much time digging into, you know, the war in Ukraine. And so I don't want to pick too much on him, but he also did decide to talk about this in public, so we'll respond.
Why you disagree? Tell Stephen.
I disagree because we should support them, I think, morally, for sure. But militarily, I think it is an absolute losing proposition. We know it's a losing proposition, and now we just don't know how to extract ourselves, which we've done many times in the past.
What do you mean by losing? How do you explain, like, who? What do you mean by that?
Unless the United States or one of the other powers that have any possibility of coming to bear literally join the battle directly, there is no chance on earth that Ukraine is going to overpower Russia, not even in defense.
Not even in defense. So without American troops fighting on the front lines, Ukrainians cannot even defend the front. I mean, like, the Ukrainians have done it for over 2 years. We're going on 3 years, and that's after 8 years of fighting the Russians from 2014 to 2022, sporadically from frozen to unfrozen and refrozen conflicts. So I think the idea that the only way this can end is with Ukraine losing. Ukraine's submission is just fate, and there's not really much we can do about it. And so us supporting them militarily is a losing effort. So the first thing I would say is the Ukrainians have been able to take back over 50% of the territory that they've lost since the start of the full-scale invasion. That is a victory. They took back the city of Kherson, the only regional capital that has been lost for the entirety of the full-scale invasion. They had the Kharkiv counteroffensive to take back large swaths of territory surrounding Kharkiv, including Izium, where they uncovered the massive Izium mass grave with over 440 bodies, people's hands tied behind their backs and shot. Those villagers, and some of the villagers and people living in cities and local villages, I've spoken to them. The treatment that they got under occupation was absolutely horrific. And now those people don't live under those conditions. Others still do, but those ones who were liberated weren't. And in large part, they were partially liberated due to the support of the United States giving Ukraine the tools necessary in those early days to help take the fight to them. Now, it wasn't just the United States. It wasn't certainly just our assistance. The Ukrainians did the lion's share of it on their own. But at the end of the day, if you don't have ammunition, you cannot fight a war. If you do not have air defense, you cannot fight a war. These are the things that we can provide the Ukrainians, as they are not asking for American troops to directly get on the ground and fight the Russians themselves. They are not asking for that. They're asking for support to hold back the Russians or push back the Russians. And considering that the Ukrainians have been able to take back 50% of their territory, they're wreaking really bad losses on the Russians right now with the restrictive U.S. policy about where the Ukrainians can strike, where the Ukrainians cannot strike, and the real dragging of the feet of USA that has had a real operational impact on battles like the battles for Avdiivka, and probably having impacts, well, no, certainly having impacts all across the front right now. The Ukrainians are still holding out. And this is as American artillery manufacturing is increasing. We just opened up a new artillery manufacturing plant for 155 millimeter shells in Texas. And we are, according to the government and according to their estimates, are going to be trying to pass over 100,000 shells produced every month come 2025. Now, I'm not saying the Ukrainian victory is guaranteed, but considering the large losses that the Russians are taking, considering that they're burning through their armored reserves, considering the lengths that they've had to go to try to get more people to join the struggle, the idea that the Russians can just do this forever in perpetuity, no matter what we contribute to the Ukrainians, and we are aimless in history, and there is nothing we can do to have an impact, try to change it for the better, and get the Ukrainians a form of sovereignty where they will not be invaded like this in the future, which we promised to do to them and to help them with in the 90s in exchange for them giving up the nuclear arsenal, I find that bogus. I think the outcomes of the war depend entirely on the actions taken by Ukraine's allies, by Ukraine, and by Ukraine's enemies. I don't think it's a predetermined outcome, certainly.
I don't think there's no chance whatsoever. I think it's hard to know how much they could win the war because they haven't really been allowed to fight for as much as they can. I know that the F-16s are supposed to come online at the end of the year. Maybe that changes things. The only reason I'm not on strong...
By the way, even when those come into effect, it's going to be like 2025 when most of them come into effect. If it comes into effect by the end of this year, it's going to be like a few.
Agree is there is a chance that it's an unwinnable conflict, even with them having full access to whatever arms people in the West want to ship them. But I think the payoff is too great that if you do manage to defeat Russia here, it puts like a huge stop in these types of militaristic plans that they have. It sends a strong message to the world that the United States would support people like Ukraine or people like Taiwan, and it might discourage that type of imperialistic activity in the future. And I think that the idea on the downside that Russia be allowed to basically conduct warfare against sovereign states, take territory from them, and then walk away from that scot-free, I think is unacceptable.
It's funny that you said imperialism. How is us sending something like an F-16, which might as well be a battleship, to Ukraine in order to help them defeat somebody else, not imperialism, not enforcing our desires on that region? It's absolutely imperialism if you look at it purely, number one. Number two...
Man, imperialism means nothing, man. It's like it's a worthless word. I don't really use it anymore because like everybody uses imperialism to mean everything. And like when you talk to like the tanky types, they're working off of like, no, I work off the Leninist version of empire. When you're talking about it in like common parlance, like obviously Russians would be considered the imperial power engaging in imperialism here. You can call it what it is, but if the idea is like no big power can support any smaller power in a defensive war because giving them weapons to defend themselves is considered imperialism, is silly, goofy, and ridiculous. Especially considering within the bounds of international law, sending weapons to Ukraine is well within their international right, well within their international legal right. What we're doing is completely within the laws of international armed conflict and within international law. The Russians are not within international law. The Russians are not operating within the laws of international armed conflict. there is a real distinction here between the difference between the Russians invading Ukraine and us giving them weapons and assistance that we promised them in the 90s if the situation happened. We didn't promise them specifically weapons, but promised them assistance with it being vague exactly how that assistance would come into fruition.
At this point, I believe that the armaments that we're giving them and the support that we're giving them, taking all the fraud out of the equation, if it's just pure, if it's just pure, militaristically, all we're doing is extending the amount of time we're grinding Ukrainians and Russians on this rock. I think that is all we are doing. That is my opinion.
I feel like imperialism has a tinge of, well, not a tinge of, I feel like imperialism is mostly defined by non-consent. So if your country invades another country, I think people would call that imperialism. If your country blows up another country, steals territory from another country, people would call that imperialism. I don't know if a country says, hey, can you send us weapons, and we send them weapons. I don't know if you would consider that imperialism. I don't think many people would, because they're consenting to it, they want it, like it's their desire to participate in that. In terms of grinding Ukrainians, you know.
By the way, all of this, either there's like two positions that would have to be taken here. The first position is that the Ukrainians not only have no chance of victory, but we're just dragging out their loss. I mean, that's the first thing they have to assume. But also, to make this equation make sense, you'd have to assume that the violence under Russian occupation would be lesser than the violence that Russia would be restricted to if the Ukrainians were just able to hold them back wherever it is. If they were able to take back Bucha, would the Russians engage in Bucha-like behavior again? If they took Izium, would they make the largest mass grave in Europe again since the Yugoslav genocide? The assumption that if the official ceasefire is signed or the official fighting stops, the violence necessarily stops, I think it's presumptive. I think it's very presumptive. And I really don't believe that the Russians can just endlessly throw lives into Ukraine forever with no consequence in constant offensives. If that was the case, then they would have won the war much earlier. And if that was the case, then right now when Ukraine's at its worst when it comes to the artillery deficit, the front line would be breaking down. Completely breaking down. Not, they got 100 meters closer to this village. Oh, and a few days later, they got 100 meters closer to this village. It would be breakdown of the front line. They don't have the ammunition to support. Like, at the end of the day, even if you don't think that Ukraine has the ability to literally push the Russians out, a lot of this is making the implicit assumption that the Russians are ready to make a deal and they'd make a fair deal and there would be a deal that the Ukrainians could actually agree to. But even if you don't think, even if you think that, Ukrainians need the equipment to be in the best negotiating position possible. The Russians respect hard power. I don't think anybody disagrees with me on the fact that the Russians, at the end of the day, will respect if you can fight them and you can beat them back, they will have to acknowledge that because that's just reality. And then that will have to impact the negotiating position. And so if the Ukrainians have the ability to say, fine, we'll fight for another 2 years. You want to kill another 300,000 Russians, another 400,000 Russians during a demographic crisis? Let's see how long your economy can hold out. And that's not to even say the Ukrainians don't have possible escalations they could do. It's not like, what if they started targeting oil export terminals that piss off the United States because it affect international oil prices, but it would certainly hurt the Russian economy. Like, it's just so much presumption on that the Russians are willing to accept a good deal right now. There's presumption about the fact that the Ukrainians would have to lose. There's they're going to lose, or they will necessarily lose no matter what we give them. And there's this presumption about what if the Ukrainians were to secede to Russian demands, that the violence would necessarily stop, or that it wouldn't just resume in a few years from now, because the Russians want to take more of Ukraine.
Going to the ground or grinding Russians into the ground. Again, I mean, Ukrainians want to fight. If they want to fight, it's their country, it's being invaded. If China or Mexico or Canada invaded U.S. territory and some protracted war happened and there were Americans that really wanted to fight in that war, I don't know if it would be enough to say, well, you know, Mexico might want to invade, but do we really want to lose American lives? Do we really care that much about South Texas? Like, I mean, we can just give them that and it's okay. I think if the people have a desire to fight and they really want to, I think they should be empowered to do so, especially if they're fighting what's largely an ideological enemy of the United States, and I would say an enemy that's clearly morally in the wrong in this case, in terms of invading a sovereign state for no good reason and trying to take territory from them.
I agree with you that if it was a voluntary action by the people that are fighting on both sides, I would wholeheartedly agree with you. And I agree with the morality of it completely, which I opened with that. My problem is that that's not what we have here. What we have here is both sides shanghaiing people, arresting them at airports, arresting them at checkpoints, border checkpoints, and dragging them back and throwing them into the meat grinder on both sides.
Okay, well, that's not happening. And the reason I know that's not happening is because there's no airports that Ukrainians could flee to, because there's no civilian aircrafts in Ukraine. There's only military aircrafts in the sky in Ukraine. So I don't know what video he thinks he saw of Ukrainian soldiers shanghaiing Ukrainians, but there is no functioning airports in Ukraine, because if there is civilian airliners in the sky, they will be shot down. So that didn't happen. Now, are there examples of the Ukrainian government? Now, putting that aside, because I doubt that was his main point, is there examples of the Ukrainian government engaging in the forceful conscription of people? Absolutely. They are engaging in mobilization. They are engaging in the mobilization of their population. And so this sets up a moral dilemma of, if a state faces the threat of annihilation, the destruction of that state as an entity, and untold, unrestricted violence through mass graves, executions, torture, rape, kidnapping of children, what means is moral and that a state would be willing to do in order to ensure its own and its people's survival, considering that the goal of every state, first and foremost, is its own survival. Make it a little bit of a realist viewpoint, but whatever. I think most states, under Ukraine circumstances, would engage in mobilization. In fact, we've engaged in mobilizations in situations which it wasn't nearly as bad as the Ukrainians are in right now. For example, World War II was bad for Europe. It was bad for a lot of people. We were attacked at World War II. At no point did we have 20% of the United States occupied. At no point were we having mass grave after mass grave uncovered in like Oklahoma, showing like all these people that were killed by Russian soldiers. But we engage in conscription. And the British can engage in conscription. And the French engage in conscription. Everybody in that war engaged in conscription. And national service in places like Finland, Sweden, and many countries on the world is still around. Now, if you principally take a position still against conscription because you say the individual liberty of the person trumps any defensive need of the state, any defensive need of the community, even fighting against a possibly genocidal opponent, it does not matter. The individual freedom of the individual trumps the security of the state every time. Now, if that's your position, number one, you're very principled. You stand up right. I could not make that declaration because I would not restrict myself in all these situations. If my country was facing the Holocaust, I think I'd be willing to draft some people in order to fight against the Holocaust or to complete subversion of America. And I think a lot of other people would too. That's why the draft is not opposed by the majority of the people in Ukraine. In fact, there's a lot of people who are like, I'm okay with the draft. I just would like to not be the person that's drafted. Like, fine, put my name. You know how in the Hunger Games, they kind of keep everybody like, kind of suppressed because it's like they only have one person as tribute. Not saying it's the same thing, obviously. But like, if you have like a system where everybody has a chance of getting pulled, you know, people might be more willing to deal with it if it isn't guaranteed that they're going to get conscripted. But general point is, I'm getting distracted. This is something that many other countries in Europe, in other continents in the world, throughout many points in history, in situations not nearly as dangerous as Ukraine's, have engaged in national mobilization, has engaged in conscription. So if we hold every other country to the standard, for example, if like we were invaded and then we engage in a draft, which we have, so we just enacted what is our currently standing policies, then we would have to take the position that no ally could morally give us help because we are engaging in a draft. And a draft is wrong. We're shanghaiing Americans defending America. If that's the consistent position you hold, that's great for you. I don't think it's practical, but I just don't see the standard apply equally. I don't see the standard applied equally.
So if what you were talking about, a force trying to defend itself, the people actively, voluntarily trying.
Have you met Ukrainian anarchists? Yeah, I've interviewed them. I interviewed one Ukrainian anarchist for Offbeat Research. If you wanted to look up my article there, I'm sure you could find it.
to defend their territory would be a completely different proposition, but that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing compelled warfare on both sides.
Okay, is there anything he said at all that would cause you to move to the slightly disagree? And if so, just move. You don't have to tell me what it is.
No.
Okay. Is there anything he said that would cause you to move to the slightly agree?
Not yet.
Okay. New claim. If Russia won the war in Ukraine, if Russia won, other European nations would be invaded. Move.
By the way, all Destiny needs for a situation like this is polling data. All Destiny needs is to throw out some polling data and be like, look, you can talk about the morality of conscription. Majority of Ukrainians still believe that they should continue to resist, especially if it means conceding their country to the Russians or conceding tons of like kidnapped Ukrainian children or any of the things that the Russians might not be willing to move on in whatever the negotiated settlement would end up looking like. I think throwing out some data and taking out that presumption about what the Russians would be willing to accept. Anyway, continuing.
If Russia won, other European nations would be invaded. Move.
I mean, I don't like that like certainty of it. I guess I would be on like slightly agree to agree or like in between there because I'm worried about Georgia, which is very tense right now. Worried about Moldova. I mean, like, can I say Ukraine again? Because, like, let's say you make a ceasefire and then the Russians invade again 3 years from now. Like, I feel like we should count that because then all you did was, like, kick the can down the road and delay the violence and possibly give the chance to the Russians to learn from their mistakes, recuperate, and then try again.
Okay, you're staying there.
I think in 91 or 92, Russia already did some funny business in Moldova. I think in the east, there's a strip of land called Transnistria that's an autonomous region, just like I think South Ossetia and
South Ossetia and Abkhazia.
Give the name of the two territories in Georgia, basically, and what they're trying to do to the regions in the Donbass. So I feel like if Ukraine is allowed to fall, or at least if Ukraine is allowed to lose territory, I don't see what would stop Russia from pursuing similar aims in non-aligned states like they have in the past with Moldova, with Georgia, and with Ukraine.
Putin is...
And I would also put forward that, like, depending on how American credibility in NATO goes, and depending how NATO defensive credibility goes, I mean, like, Putin's goals could change, or Putin's perception on how he can interact with NATO could change. Especially if there's enough domestic instability in the United States to think that we couldn't participate even if we wanted to in, say, a defensive support of our allies in the region.
Like they have in the past with Moldova.
I'm not saying that's 100% likely or anything like that. I'm just saying that it is a concern.
Similar aims in non-aligned states like they have in the past with Moldova, with Georgia, and with Ukraine.
Putin is very intelligent. If Russia invades a member of the EU or of NATO.
Ooh, he's not going to talk about Moldova, though. See, this is the thing I've noticed. When I talk about Moldova as a possible country to get invaded, usually what happens when I would feel, okay, fine, Russia wins in Ukraine, then what? And then I'll say, okay, well, maybe they invade Moldova. Because they'll be like, well, they won't invade NATO because of NATO Article 5. And then we'll just skip Moldova. It's like, okay, but then after Moldova, who will they'll invade? And we're like, okay, so we're just going to sign off 2.5 million people? Really? I think that happened during a debate with Rob Nora once. Very interesting.
Either NATO immediately responds in force, or NATO, or even the EU falls apart. And he knows that.
Are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania members of NATO?
No.
They are, but that also doesn't necessarily mean, depending on who's president, if that president doesn't have belief in our defense commitments to Europe, say like a populist isolationist who has in the past said maybe Russia should invade. I don't know who that would be. I'm sure Jack can figure it out. That would be of concern.
Are you worried about Putin going after Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania?
He might try that. But when you say Europe, I think EU. So maybe that's my problem.
Oh. If Russia won against Ukraine, other nations...
Well, are we not going to have like a correction that like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are in NATO and they get NATO Article 5 protection? We're not gonna get like that's just gonna like hang. Okay.
Nations would be invaded. Move.
Wait, what was the question?
Oh. If Russia won against Ukraine, other nations would be invaded. Move.
Hey, look. Slightly disagree. He's now less sure. I think this is unironically, it's a position that I think people hold based on a lack of knowledge of Russian history, where a lot of them don't know of the previous wars Russia has fought since the end of the Cold War. And so their first like real knowledge of it is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They don't know about Moldova. They don't know about Georgia. Some of them don't even know about Ukraine in 2014 or all of the like troops that they send over during the ATO to like try to keep the Donbass and Luhansk People's Republics propped up artificially. I think like once you enter this information and you read like Putin's statements about post-Soviet states and their place in the world and how Russia could have a claim to all these post-Soviet states, it's kind of impossible to say that there's no possibility of that Putin would follow what he has clearly indicated is a pathway he's willing to walk down.
And the reason you're slightly disagreeing is because you're opening for the possibility of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
Absolutely. But I'd still disagree.
Again, Moldova is more likely than those countries necessarily, but it depends on who's president and what the political situation is in NATO, but
Nowhere near as vociferously as before, but only because it's gone so badly for Russia.
The war in Ukraine.
Yes.
So why do you disagree?
I love that it's, in one hand, it's like the war has gone so badly for Russia, but also it is impossible for them to lose. They can lose to Afghanistan, but they could never lose to Ukraine when they have like radar aircraft and anti-ship drones and have been holding back the Russian army for over 2.5 years.
That you don't think Poland is under threat? You don't think?
No, I think if you're in NATO, I don't believe you're not going to get attacked. I don't think. I think you would get absolutely obliterated. So for
Man, we're too complacent about NATO defense policy. If there are people running for office saying Putin should invade NATO countries and like kind of like brushing off NATO credibility, this is something we have to re-enter into the conversation as no longer necessarily an implicit assumption. If there is a political conversation amongst the highest echelons of power about it, and within the Republican Party, Trump is the highest echelon of power.
for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, pretty sure those are 3 NATO states. I don't think if you got invaded, I think Russia would get obliterated. I think. Here's 2 things that I would think about. So
Okay, so Destiny corrected the record on that.
Is I think it was correctly stated that the war in Ukraine has gone pretty terribly for Russia, and that's part of why they might be disincentivized to invade other countries. But I feel like that's an argument from my side, because I think a big reason why the war went so horribly in Ukraine is because of the massive support Ukraine got from the West. So because I feel like the arguments that you're using, I don't know if you personally would believe this, but the arguments that you're using would have been used a couple years ago to say we shouldn't support Ukraine at all, in which case Russia would have won probably far easier and far quicker and gotten far more territory, is one thing I would consider. And then a second thing that scares me is when I hear people defend the proposition that we shouldn't support Ukraine.
By the way, can I just say, like, while like street like debates like this, I don't know, you could probably do it in a studio environment. I do like conversations like this that are polite. There's a back and forth. You can go from one to the other. I do like conversations like this. I do like conversations.
All of the arguments that I hear, well,
and having to speak to everyday Joes is always good to make sure.
Could lead to World War III. It's not our country. You're causing other people to die. I feel like, scarily, all of those arguments could theoretically apply to NATO countries. That let's say you're somebody who says, well, if we fight in Ukraine, what if World War III happens and the whole world gets blown up? Well, let's say they decide to invade a NATO country tomorrow. That argument is still there. Like, and now it's NATO, so it's even more scary that it could be a nuclear conflict. So. Yeah.
Do you want to comment on that?
This is where the question of deterrence would come in. Like the question of nuclear deterrence and the Russians knowing that if they tried to engage in nuclear war, they'd be annihilated. And having that deterrence, like there's a difference between compellence and deterrence. It's a lot easier to deter than to compel. And so, I mean, I would say that there is a little bit of a difference as the war is already technically going on over Ukraine. But I think Destiny broadly is making it.
Well, yes, we have chosen to entangle ourselves politically and culturally with those members of that state. So yes, it would be a completely different thing. But we can't ignore history. History has Vietnam, Korea, a litany of situations where we have dug ourselves into holes that have never ended well. History has shown them all to be.
Was it Korea that we dug into? I mean, you could, if you are against American participation in Korea whatsoever, okay, that's one thing. But when it came to negotiations over Korea, we wanted to negotiate in like 52, I think. We wanted to negotiate quick. It was only Stalin's death that enabled negotiations. Just if I remember correctly.
Be disasters. And this has every single earmark of those same conflicts.
Okay.
I mean, no, it doesn't. We're not directly involved, so our troops aren't dying. It's not a civil war. It's a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Why? The Vietnam War was an asymmetric guerrilla war. That's very different than the war that's being fought right now in Ukraine. The burn rates of the equipment, the loss of troops. Russia's lost like 3 or 4 times what we've lost in Vietnam in like 2 years. It's again, these are not comparable. I understand like there are wars in history and those wars were bad. So you look at a new war and you're like, supporting this side on it would also be bad. But like wars can have different interests and different qualities when it comes to how the war's fought, whether it's guerrilla, whether it's traditional like military versus military, peer v peer competition. Like, people try to oversimplify these conflicts to compare them, and I understand that comparisons help people like bring conflicts into stuff they already understand. Like if you know the war in Afghanistan, then maybe you can use that as a jumping off point to explain the war in Ukraine. But I think sometimes when we try to do these comparisons, due to them just not being, I would say, very accurate comparisons, you end up just muddying the waters more than you do like, making the situation more transparent for those who don't understand.
Okay, new claim. The U.S. helping Ukraine protects Taiwan from China. The U.S. helping Ukraine protects Taiwan from China. Move. Why you?
I mean, I would be like between slightly agree and agree. I wonder if Destiny is going to say, I mean, the reason I would say is that if the Chinese think that we're not even willing to spend like billions of dollars to let the Russians like fall on their own sword in Ukraine, support the Ukrainians to defend our largest export market and our deepest allies in European nations, then how could you possibly think that the United States is going to land troops in Taipei and fight for the island? That at least is the equation pushed forward by people saying that deterrence theory needs to be held up in Ukraine to defend America's international interests. Now, there is like a danger of falling in a hole here where every war must be fought to its completion in victory, or you deter everywhere and you fall everywhere. There are ways that you could try to make up for, let's say the Russians won in Ukraine. There's ways and America just said, and the reason they lost wasn't because of the Russians found a new technology. They lost because we pulled out our support. That's going to be pretty hard to undo the damage. But one thing you could do is you could up aid to Taiwan massively, and then make the point like, well, yes, we care about Taiwan. We didn't care about Ukraine. And so that's why we're dedicating funds to this, but we didn't dedicate any more funds to that. You could try to use verbal messaging on top of actions taken to make your message clear and make your message credible to the Chinese. But this is a lot of effort to go through, and it still might not necessarily work. But I will say, for people who think it's bizarre or impossible, I think it's kind of funny when it's a lot of the same people who also think that the pullout from Afghanistan is what caused the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Just tell him why you slightly agree.
I think that seeing how the United States commits itself to allies abroad, I think sends a strong signal to other people that might want to, I guess, like mess with those interests. So showing a really strong commitment to a partner like Ukraine or even a partner like Israel might demonstrate to China like, hey, if you go to Taiwan, you're going to see the exact same thing, that you have a very stubborn America that's willing to send a lot of arms and that's willing to continue to support.
Hey, IRI, thank you for the raid of 286 people. My goodness, that's a lot of raiders. Welcome in, everybody. We're watching Destiny debate Ukraine. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Valasparkle has donated $5. The average person is very short-sighted and uncreative when it comes to war. Russia may not declare a conventional war on NATO or EU, but they will attack in unconventional
Yeah, like separate. Yeah, you're right though. I mean, we've already got fire bombings in the UK from Russian assets. We've already got industrial sabotage in Germany, plans from Russian assets that fought with the Russians in Ukraine to bomb American bases in Germany, industrial sabotage in the Baltics, industrial sabotage in Czechia, attempts to use refugees to bomb railways that are used to ship goods into Ukraine. Real stories that are going on right now. Now that's a little different than the separatists because you're kind of making your own faction to fight on your behalf. But I mean, the Russians have a long history of that. Some people try to describe the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a civil war by pointing to the rebels in Donetsk and Luhansk, but I always don't. And the reason why is that the vast majority of the power here is coming from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And most of those who are fighting under those formations, and they were doing it before, were people who were propped up by the Russians. Or in many instances, like Igor Girkin, literally former FSB agent, being supplied by the Russian army. And if I would have to say, just because there was a proxy that was created that was supposed to represent an alternative body, therefore it is a civil war, then I would have to say that the Russian invasion of Finland was a civil war. Because when the Russians invaded Finland, it wasn't just Soviet Union versus Finland. It was Soviet Union, Finnish Socialist Republic versus Finland. They created an entity to represent socialism in Finland because the goal was to take over the whole country and make it communist. And so now, are we going to say, since there was an entity representing the Finnish communists, that now it was not the Soviet invasion of Finland, it's now the Finnish Civil War? It's just that 99.9% of the soldiers on one side of the Finnish Civil War were all Russian. Yeah, I don't like that description. But anyway, thank you, Raiders, for all coming on in here. I do appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed your big Trump guilty day.
People that are in opposition to your, I guess, invasions. The only reason I'm just
Yeah, I'm just going to ask why. That sounds like you should be on agree with the reason you gave.
The only thing is because I'm not 100% confident on the factual background. So, for instance, it could be that Taiwan represents such a threat or such an opportunity for China that no amount of international dissuasion would keep them from invading. I don't have the full background there, so that it could be the case that you could show me a set of facts where
deterrence is murky and you don't know how your enemies are going to perceive your attempts to deter them. They could take a totally different perception from. For example, like, while I think this is unlikely, let's say that we supported Ukraine to victory. What the Chinese could, hypothetically, it's unlikely because it's a silly conclusion, could conclude, wow, America really cares about Ukraine. And they must really care about Europe. Well, if they're so concentrated on Europe, maybe they won't care much if we do something in Taiwan. Like, that would be a silly conclusion to have, but you cannot control how the other end perceives your attempts at deterrence or your attempts to, like, dissuade them from invading. Even if you verbalize it, they might still interpret it in a different way. But verbalizing, of course, does help.
it's like China really.
But there's very little verbalization. A lot of it's just done through action, which make it quite murky.
Have the full background there, so that it could be the case that you could show me a set of facts where it's like China really needs Taiwan, and it really doesn't matter what the U.S. does; they're going to try it no matter what. And in that case, maybe like, oh, okay, well, maybe it doesn't apply here. But
Okay.
2 points. One, by seeing how we've helped Ukraine, Taiwan sees us as more mealy-mouthed and strong. It hurts that proposition.
What? Oh, I'm sorry. Can I hear that again? I'm sorry. I think I must have misheard him. Hear it again.
going to try it no matter what. And in that case, maybe like, oh, okay, well, maybe it doesn't apply here. But
Okay.
2 points. One, by seeing how we've helped Ukraine, Taiwan sees us as more mealy-mouthed and strong. It hurts that proposition.
If that's the case, then wouldn't the counter to that be, or the answer to that be, not being mealy-mouthed and being consistent in our support for Ukraine? The Taiwanese want us to support Ukraine. Let's be clear. The Taiwanese have sent aid to Ukraine. We've sent aid to Ukraine. The Taiwanese want us to support Ukraine. They do see it as connected to their struggle, and they're watching the war very carefully. Now, it's not directly connected in their struggle as in Russia wins, then China wins, necessarily. But they do see it as interconnected. They do see it as interconnected. I don't see how us being, like, for example, dragging our feet on the aid, that your solution to that is just not support Ukraine at all. Because if the problem is that the Taiwanese think we're mealy-mouthed, the answer would not be to abandon our ally and then make them more scared and think that we're more mealy-mouthed. It would be to show ourselves to be a reliable ally.
Directly.
Oh, you mean, I just want to make sure I understand. So you mean because we haven't given them enough arms?
Yeah, we haven't gone in hard. We've tacitly, we've given them money and, as he claimed, well, as he stated correctly, only up to a certain level of weapon systems, right? We haven't gone all the way.
We're starting to go further when it comes to ATACMS. We've sent the ATACMS over. Now there's a lack of restrictions on striking them in Kharkiv. Biden is still making them fight with one arm behind their back, not allowing them to strike Russian air bases with those weapons and stuff like that. But for sending the money, most of our shipments have been weapons. The vast majority of our aid have been weapons. Relatively speaking, we haven't sent that much cold hard cash.
That's problem number one, the reason I'm all the way over here. The other one is we're already helping Taiwan. We have given Taiwan access to one of the most advanced and powerful weapon systems that are non-classified that we have, which is the Aegis Destroyer. There's no way we can help them anymore other than sending an army over there.
I agree on the first part. That's why we should allow Ukraine to fight all the way and give them as much as they need to fight. Because, yeah, the restricted stuff, the halfway, the indecision is worse than a bad decision, I think.
Can I pause you on that for a second?
Yeah.
That argument that he just made, does that, the initial claim that we started with is the U.S. should support Ukraine for as long as they want to fight.
Yes.
And you were saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to make sure I got this right. You were saying that because we didn't go all in on Ukraine, the Chinese will see that and be less disincentivized.
Correct.
So if your reasoning is correct, isn't then that a reason
Yeah.
for why the U.S.
Talked
should
about 5 seconds
basically
ago.
be going all in on Ukrainian aid?
No, Russia is not a global threat. China is. Russia's a spectrum.
But so, okay, but the question is about deterrence. The Chinese. And they wouldn't have to be a global threat necessarily to not deter the Chinese. Also, let's stop underestimating the Russians. Let's stop underestimating the Russians. Just because the Russians don't have the same economic power as the Chinese, they make up for and disregard for their own people's lives and sending them into wars, okay? So they can still be, due to their geographic location, largest country in the world between Europe and Asia, their massive access to natural gas resources, and their manpower pool, they're willing to just throw out on the sword in a way that most Western countries would be horrified in responding to, wherever sending their own populations to do something similar, certainly at least now. I don't think we should underestimate the Russians and just be like, oh, they're not a real threat. They're not a real global threat because they've had troubles in Ukraine. Well, the solution isn't to wait until they fix all their problems, remobilize more, and then are an even bigger threat. The solution would be, oh my gosh, you're right. They're not as big of a threat as they could be. Let's take this opportunity now.
Go to the neutral, please. Everybody. Russia is a global threat. Move. Okay.
Wow, they're on completely opposite ends.
Pick up your board, please. Pick up your board. I want you to take a guess at what reason he has written down there. Which is best reason?
They have nukes.
Bro, fuck this game.
That-
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Jesus, I can't.
These guys are watching my shit. You must go to my Twitter.
No, we're not. Wow. Okay. Wow. That's okay. So show them what you got.
It looks like a tree, but it's a bomb.
Okay.
That's the only good.
I mean, like, that's new. That's one of them. It's the nukes. It's natural gas. It's its geography. It's like its ideology. Like, somebody could have all the natural gas. They can have nukes. They have all this stuff. And if they're just chilling, then that's not a problem. But but Vladimir Putin has made very clear that he thinks that Russia has a claim to basically the entirety of the post-Soviet sphere. And so, like, I would say for the post-Soviet sphere, which also includes NATO countries, by the way, yeah, that is a threat. Now, maybe you could say the post-Soviet sphere, there are militias that they're gathering in Africa, and like this is only a threat in like maybe 2 continents, maybe 3 if you include Asia for Russia, but that's like still a significant amount of the world. Like when we say global threat, does it have to be like a threat to fucking Ecuador for it to work, or for it to really be a global threat? I just really hope we don't underestimate the Russians. We don't need to overestimate them to the point that we think and we're in this weird position where on one hand, the Russians are just so powerful that's impossible that no matter with how much mobilization Ukraine does, how well trained they are, and what weapons they have, Ukraine will always have to submit. There's nothing you can do about it. But on the other hand, also, the Russians are not a global threat. They're very weak. They've been shown to be weak through this war. They're not that worrisome. We don't need to worry about it.
Argument.
Wow. You're going to guess his number one reason for believing that?
I'm going to say just generally like militarily or economically insignificant country.
The military are economically insignificant.
Partial.
Is it enough for you to say yes?
No.
Okay, guess again.
They don't have the capability to conduct threatening warfare.
Is that the reason? It is. It is the reason. Can you show him, please?
Really?
They're incapable of projecting power beyond the region and resort to murder to do so.
Murder is a threat to me, personally. If I get murdered, I die. So I would still consider that a threat. But region, like, they're the largest country in the world. Like, if we're just, all they can really do when it comes to invasions is regional wars. Let's look at map of world. Okay, and give an idea of like all the regions Russia just naturally can mess with. Okay, Asia, they can go into the Middle East, and they've been involved in the Middle East. They've been involved in Syria. They've been making deals with the Iranians. They've been engaged in horrific bombing campaigns in Syria. They've been involved in supporting Khalifa Haftar. They've been involved in Africa. They've been involved in supporting the RSF in Africa. And they're butchering, even though they've been accused of horrific war crimes and genocide. They obviously have access to Europe as they are invading a European country right now. So we're talking about Europe, Middle East, and Asia, and current involvement in Africa, including working with military dictatorships that have overthrown democratically elected governments in West Africa, right? Now I'm just talking about this half of the world. I'm sure if I went to the other half of the world, I can find some stuff too, but Russia's the largest country on the planet. And so saying like, it's only regional wars, that region is half the world. By their size, that's half the world. And like the invasion of Ukraine has been a threatening war. And when you consider how much artillery has been expended from Europe and how they were not ready for the intensity of the artillery warfare, that is a threat to nations like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and Moldova, because they would not be able to produce those many shells, which is why Europe and the United States is making massive investments into these industries. Again, like Russia's geography is a great tool here, because no matter what, it still can touch like half the world. So even if you just say it's a regional power, its region is half the world.
When you're murdering individuals.
By the way, even if we just put it there, like, okay, it's half the world, but it's not all the world. Wouldn't you still want to stop them before it gets even worse? Like when I read the 30 Years Crisis, Carr's book leading up to Second World War, my walkaway isn't like, wow, this will help me identify when World War III starts. My walkaway is, wow, this is something we could use to try to prevent an ascendant aggressive power from taking advantage of appeasement and destroying deterrence and dominating the continent.
Have no power.
Okay.
As a state.
Okay, do me a favor. Go to put that down over there and go to the neutral. China is more of a threat to the United States than Russia. Move.
In what way? See, it's hard to say for sure, because on one hand, China obviously has much more economic power and can produce probably much more than the Russians, almost certainly. And so there's that. But on the other hand, the Russians actually the Chinese haven't actually tried to invade and take back Taiwan. They talk a big game, but they haven't actually tried it. So if we can effectively engage in deterrence in Taiwan, but the Russians didn't care about deterrence when it comes to Ukraine and invaded and is going to keep trying and it keeps pushing, then for the time being, I mean, if that was to keep as it is, I would probably lean towards the Russians, because they're causing more international chaos, more damage to international markets. They're the ones aggressing upon allies that we both made agreements with. But then again, if you're just talking about like pure economic capacity, pure military capacity, if you're talking about like where the United States is focusing its attention and thinks, at the very least, that it's like the most powerful nation that rivals it, it is China. It is certainly has the most oomph behind it to try to challenge the U.S.-led order.
You can stay on the neutral if you want. China is more of a threat to the West than Russia. Move.
To the West? Oh, Russia would 100% be more of a threat to the... I mean, Russia is invading what has always historically, when you say the West, been considered, like, I mean, in our common lexicon, the West. That's Europe. It is our main export market. I would say for the West, just if we're considering the West just Europe, then yes. If we're considering the West, Europe, and Asia, and anyone that's an American ally, it gets a little bit more complicated. But currently, again, the Russians are invading Ukraine. The Chinese haven't invaded Taiwan yet. So, I mean, I can project on the idea that they will invade Taiwan in the future, but that's not a known. That's not a known factor.
Go back to the neutral. We're going to start with the same claim we started with. The United States should support Ukraine for as long as they want to fight. Move. And you started there and you're ending there. And you started there and you're ending there. What would you have to hear to move you? To move you this way?
A cohesive strategy for victory. But once again, I support the defense of Ukraine by the Ukrainians and the assistance of the Ukrainians. But the question was, should we continue at this point? And I don't believe we should continue at this point.
Okay. What would
But
you...
cohesive strategy, like a cohesive strategy to like cripple the Russians, or like like cohesive strategy to take back Crimea? Like, it would depend on what he wants a cohesive strategy to do. Because the Ukrainians have a cohesive strategy to like disrupt Russian logistics. They've been targeting Crimea like hell. They believe that Crimea is kind of like the black heart of the Russian occupation. If you disrupt the logistics in Crimea, you can destroy the Kerch Bridge. You can really undermine the logistical support. I mean, like, there's cohesive strategies that the Zelensky government has announced. But I think when most Americans say this, I guess they mean like a Biden cohesive strategy, where Biden kind of comes in as a general and says, this is what we're going to do. But I don't know. I don't know if he means like a Zelensky cohesive strategy or Biden cohesive.
What would it take you to move to slightly agree?
Probably the same as him, but in the opposite. Like, if somebody could demonstrate that, like, they've been fully unlocked, they've got access to all of our weapon systems, but it seems like they haven't been able to make any progress. People are dying. We're wasting money. They're wasting lives. And we're like, okay, well, at some point we need an off-ramp, or it's time to probably... Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make a comment because I think this is really interesting. So you guys...
It is good that both of them gave things that could change their mind. That is important, I think, for somebody being at least somewhat good faith.
You two are absolutely on the same page in terms of what it would take. You're both you're both agreeing what the evidence is.
Yes, but I don't agree that if we give them every weapon system they want, or we have to give them, that they will prevail. They will not.
Yeah, man, he cannot say that. He says that so confidently. I wish I had that type of confidence to say like that. I mean, it probably wouldn't be good for my coverage, but it'd be good for my mental health.
I think it's the exact opposite. I think we agree 100%, like, morally. Yeah. I think we disagree on the empirics, because my guess...
Wait, what about the conscription things? I think you guys would probably disagree about the conscription morals, unless Destiny is like super anti-conscription in it.
This is going to be that if I were to say, if tomorrow, if we give Ukraine one F-35, they could clear out the rest of Ukraine and Russians would all go home, I'm guessing you'd be in favor of that.
If there was an F-35...
I'm making a ridiculous claim, but let's say you give them one F-35 and that's... Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah. If there was a cohesive, realistic strategy that had any semblance of succeeding put forward, I would change my mind.
Okay, so...
By the way, when we talk about, like, success, like, why is it that Ukraine either pushes the Russians out of Ukraine, or we have to, like, tap out and we just do whatever the Russians fucking want? Why does it have to be one of those two things? Can it not be we have no strong enough evidence to say that the Russians implicitly want to immediately declare peace that would be fair and equitable and would allow Ukraine to actually develop? Because you can't just take away all of Ukraine's coastline, expect it to survive as a state, right? You can't take away all of its most fertile farming grounds and expect the breadbasket of Europe to still be the breadbasket of Europe and have a stable economy afterwards. But, like, wouldn't, again, the stronger position if you were in his shoes, in my mind, would be always, well, I want them to negotiate, but we got to give them a ton of tools first so they can negotiate from a position of strength so we can get the best deal. But like you would pair that with negotiation with, like, for example, a deal would be like, fine, my position is we send them all this equipment, which helps them get in a better position to negotiate on the condition that they negotiate. That would be a position I still disagree with on the forcing them to negotiate under certain terms, stuff like that. But I would feel like it would be more defensible. It'd be more defensible if what he's saying about him truly caring about Ukraine, him thinking it's moral, and saying that if we could give them tools that they could succeed with, he would. Then if you cannot hit the moon, I mean, you can't hit the stars, you aim for the moon, right?
And then I would say, and then on my end, because I think all the F-16s come online and the training is done by, I think it's towards the end of this year. Let's say they have full access to those planes, and let's.
By the way, they do not have full access to the F-16 by the end of this year. They have F-16s in the country by the end of this year, but it's going to be a few F-16s. Then next year is when they're going to have more numbers of F-16s. But like, if we give them like 90 F-16s and they don't beat the Russians, we can't be surprised by that. We would need to equip them with enough F-16s that it could be so they could deny Russian air dominance and then try to do their own air sorties in response at a certain point. And so they could start to inflict devastating losses on the Russians and make it so that their manpower disadvantage is canceled out by just high Russian losses. And that's only going to be possible if we equip them properly. Like, we can't give them 31 Abrams tanks and then look surprised when 31 Abrams tanks didn't smash the Russian lines.
Let's say like 75% of them get shot down in 2 months. Then I'd say, okay, well, probably time to extricate ourselves from here. Yeah.
So again, you're both basically agreeing with each other about what it would take.
No. No,
Okay,
no, no.
then I'm missing something.
He's saying in a hypothetical situation, if you could give me proof that sending X weapon system over there would turn the tide decisively against Russia, would I support giving them that weapon? Absolutely.
So you both would?
I would.
Okay,
But-
so
but
you
I
are
think-
on the same page.
But I don't think that exists.
Okay, but that's whether or not it accords with reality is irrelevant at the moment.
Okay,
you
I see
both
what you're saying.
you both
Yes.
have.
Yes.
You're both in agreement that you're looking at the outcome and the United States supplying it. You just don't think it's possible.
And the ends don't justify the means, and the means are grotesque.
Okay.
Okay, so again, Destiny didn't throw anything out there to fight him on conscription or the morality of conscription, which, I mean, obviously as a streamer, that's probably not an issue you debate very often, but it's something I'm hearing used more and more, and we need to get ready to say, like, okay, so to be clear, the United States should not have conscripted anyone in World War II, and any army that engages conscription, we should not have supported. So we shouldn't have sent aid to the Soviet Union during World War II, we shouldn't have sent aid to the United Kingdom during World War II. Like, there's so many different military forces that in a state of struggle for national survival, they're going to engage in conscription, and I don't think this moral standard could hold the test of time, could hold up when it comes to, like, the rubber hits the road and real geopolitics enters the room.
So this is actually really encouraging to me that people agree on what it would take, right, Reed? Am I missing something? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. That's enough of that. Man. And what do I think of this? The conscription stuff, I think Destiny was weakest on. He didn't really have a response to it. I don't know if it's just something he doesn't think about, but he didn't really have anything to respond to the conscription stuff. He knew about the Baltics being in NATO, so he was able to correct the record on that, which is good. I do think that I think Destiny did okay here. I think that, you know, he could have been maybe more aggressive, but he also is trying to temper himself in this conversation since he's just trying to talk to like an average Joe about the war. I could always say, like, for example, I think talking about the Budapest Memorandum and commitments we made in the 90s towards denuclearization, and like there's other stuff that could be brought up that I think would be better, more grounded justifications. I think you could argue from the interest of the United States much better, but this is also edited, so I don't know what was left out of the conversation. But he did okay, considering it was a street interview and it's not his main topic of focus anymore. Destiny is trying hard to not look like a psycho. Did he succeed? I'll leave that up to you guys. He did fine? Yeah, he did fine. I think so. Let's see.